Have you ever been the reason someone snapped? My friend Stephanie asked me to deliver divorce papers to her husband at his office. She couldn't do it herself because she'd already moved out and was terrified of seeing him. I knew Greg had a temper, but Stephanie said he always controlled himself at work, so I should do it there. But by the time I got to Greg's office, it was mostly empty. He was sitting at his desk typing and looked up with a friendly smile when I knocked. Greg had always kept Stephanie so isolated from her friends, he didn't even recognize me. "Can I help you?" he asked, and I just handed him the envelope saying it was a delivery that required his signature. He seemed normal, even chatted about the weather, but then he opened it. I watched his face change as he read the first line. The smile disappeared like someone had erased it, replaced by complete stillness that was somehow worse than anger. His breathing got shallow and quick. "Divorce," he said. Not a question, but like he was testing how the word felt. He kept reading, his knuckles going white as he gripped the papers. I started backing toward the door. "She didn't even have the courage to tell me herself," he said, voice eerily calm. He stood up slowly, papers still in hand, and I noticed how much bigger he was than me. 23 years, and she sends a stranger. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. A vein in his temple was pulsing, and his face was getting redder by the second. I told him I was just the messenger and needed to go. Greg walked around his desk toward me, not fast but deliberate, blocking my path to the door. "Did she tell you what a monster I am?" he asked, stepping closer. "Did she tell you her version of our marriage?" I could smell coffee and something sour on his breath. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I said I didn't know anything about it, just doing a favor. "A favor," he repeated, slamming his hand so hard his keyboard jumped. "You're helping her destroy my life as a favor." His voice was getting louder with each word. I tried to move toward the door, but he grabbed my shoulder, not violent but firm enough to stop me. His fingers dug in through my shirt. "Where is she?" he asked, his grip tightening. "Where is my wife?" I said I didn't know, and he squeezed harder, his thumb finding the pressure point above my collarbone. "Don't lie to me," he said, and I could feel him trembling with rage. "She had to give you these papers. You know where she is." I insisted I didn't know, that she'd dropped them at my apartment, and his face went darker. He shoved me backward into the wall, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to let me know he could. He let go and walked to his desk, pulling something from the drawer. My whole body went cold thinking it was a weapon, but it was his phone. He scrolled through photos, showing me pictures of Stephanie at their wedding, with their kids, at Christmas. "This is my family," he said, voice breaking. "My whole life." Then his voice went flat again. "And you're helping her take it away." He threw the phone at the wall where it shattered, the crack sounding like a shot in the quiet office. I heard footsteps in the hallway and felt relief thinking someone else was working late, but Greg didn't even glance at the door. He was staring at me with this intensity that made my skin crawl. "You have no idea what you've started," he said. He picked up a paperweight from his desk, heavy glass shaped like an award, turning it over in his hands. "She thinks she can just leave? Just take everything?" He threw it through his office window, glass exploding outward into the night. The sudden violence made me jump, and he smiled at my fear. The footsteps passed by without stopping. Greg grabbed the divorce papers again, reading through them properly this time, his lips moving as he scanned each line. His face went from red to purple as he found something in the custody section. "She wants full custody," he whispered, then screamed it. "Full custody of my children." He threw the papers at me and they scattered across the floor. He picked up his desk chair and smashed it against the wall, pieces of plastic flying everywhere. "My kids," he kept saying, pacing now like a caged animal. "She can't take my kids." He punched the wall hard enough to leave a hole in the drywall, then examined his bloody knuckles like they belonged to someone else. "I'll kill her before she takes my kids," he said matter-of-factly, and that calm delivery made it so much worse than if he'd screamed it. I ran for the door, but he was faster, slamming it shut and standing with his back against it. "You're not leaving until you tell me where she is," he said, and his calmness was back, but his eyes were wild. "We're going to call her together. You're going to get her on the phone." I said I didn't have her new number, but he grabbed my phone from my hand and started scrolling through it. When he found her contact, his smile was triumphant and terrifying. He found Stephanie's contact and hit call, putting it on speaker. When it went to voicemail, he grabbed me by the throat and squeezed just enough to make breathing difficult. "This is not how this ends," he said calmly. "I'm going to make sure of that." His fingers pressed harder into my windpipe, and I felt my legs start to give out while he scrolled through my phone with his other hand. My vision got fuzzy around the edges, and black spots started dancing in front of my eyes, so I slapped at his arm over and over until he loosened his grip just enough for me to suck in air. He found Stephanie's mom in my contacts and hit the call button, keeping me pinned against the wall with one hand while holding my phone with the other. The phone rang 3 times before going to voicemail, and Greg's face got even redder as he started leaving a message about how Stephanie's mom better call him back right now if she wants to see her daughter alive. While he was ranting into the phone about custody and how no judge would take his kids away, I managed to cough out something that sounded like Maple Street between gasps for air. Greg stopped mid-sentence and stared at me, demanding to know what I just said, so I shook my head and pretended I hadn't meant to say anything, but he grabbed my jaw and made me look at him. He asked if that's where Stephanie was hiding, and when I didn't answer fast enough, he squeezed my throat again until I nodded frantically. He wanted the exact address, but I shook my head and wheezed that I didn't know the house number, just that it was on Maple Street somewhere. His hand tightened again, and I thought I was going to pass out when we both heard footsteps coming down the hallway outside. Greg let go of my throat, and I dropped to my knees gasping while someone knocked on the door asking if everything was okay in there. Through the door, a man said he was Christopher Babb from building security, and he'd gotten reports of breaking glass from this floor. Greg cleared his throat and called out that everything was fine, just an accident during a conference call that got heated, and he'd already called maintenance about the window. Christopher asked to come in and check, but Greg said that wasn't necessary. He'd file an incident report first thing in the morning and pay for any damages. There was a pause, and then Christopher said, "Okay, but to keep it down down because other people were still working, and we heard his footsteps moving away down the hall. Greg locked the door and turned the deadbolt, then grabbed my arm and dragged me to a chair, pushing me down into it while he started pacing back and forth. He kept muttering about custody and how Stephanie couldn't take his kids, checking the broken window every few seconds like he expected security to come back. My throat hurt so bad I could barely swallow, and I could feel the bruises already forming where his fingers had been. I rubbed my neck and tried to think of some way to get help, but Greg was between me and the door, still pacing and talking to himself about lawyers and court dates. I asked if I could use the bathroom, thinking maybe I could find another way out or at least lock myself in until help came, but Greg grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the bones grind together. He said I wasn't going anywhere until I told him exactly where Stephanie was hiding and yanked me back down when I tried to stand up. The pain shot up my arm, and I couldn't help crying out, which made him smile like he'd won something. He picked up my phone again and found Stephanie's number, putting it on speaker while it rang. When it went to voicemail, he started talking in this calm voice that was scarier than yelling, describing exactly what he was going to do to her when he found her. He talked about breaking her fingers one by one and making sure she never walked right again, all while staring straight at me so I'd know he meant it for me too. My stomach twisted as he explained how he'd make sure the kids knew their mother abandoned them and how he'd turn them against her so they'd never want to see her again. He said he knew judges and lawyers who owed him favors, and she'd never get custody, not even supervised visits, because he'd make sure everyone knew she was crazy and dangerous. The whole time he was talking, he kept flexing his bloody knuckles from where he'd punched the wall earlier. Then this beeping started from somewhere in the building, that annoying sound when a door stays open too long, and Greg stopped talking to listen. He moved to the broken window to look out into the parking lot, trying to see if security was doing rounds or if someone was coming into the building. While he was distracted, I started sliding my chair backward toward the door, just an inch at a time so he wouldn't notice. The beeping kept going, and Greg was getting more agitated, sticking his head out the window to get a better look at the ground below. I saw the fire alarm on the wall about 10 feet away, and knew if I could reach it, the whole building would have to evacuate. There's something really strange about how Greg keeps switching between total rage and this creepy calm voice. Makes me wonder if he's done this before with Stephanie behind closed doors. I kept inching backward while Greg cursed at the beeping sound, and when I was close enough, I jumped up and ran for the alarm. Greg spun around, but I was already pulling the handle down, and the shrieking sound exploded through the building, so loud it hurt my ears. His face went from confused to furious in about half a second when he realized what I'd done. I yanked the door open and ran into the hallway, hearing him roar behind me as he came after me. The stairwell door was at the end of the hall, and I sprinted for it, my legs shaking so bad I almost fell twice. I could hear his feet pounding on the carpet behind me, and him yelling that I was going to regret this. I hit the stairwell door with my shoulder and practically fell down the first flight of stairs, grabbing the railing to keep from tumbling all the way down. Greg was only a few seconds behind me, and I could hear him cursing as he chased me down, taking the stairs 3 at a time with his longer legs. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it might explode, and my legs burned as I jumped down the last few steps of each flight. I burst through the exit door into the parking lot just as I heard sirens getting closer, probably fire trucks responding to the alarm. Christopher Babb was standing by the door with another security guard, and they both turned when I came flying out with Greg right behind me. I screamed that he attacked me and they needed to call the cops, pulling down my collar to show them my throat. Greg tried to act calm, saying there was a misunderstanding and I was overreacting, but the guards saw the bruises already turning purple on my neck, and one of them stepped between us while the other pulled out his phone to call 911. The cops showed up fast, 2 officers in a patrol car pulling up to the building within maybe 5 minutes while Christopher kept Greg away from me and the other guard stayed on the phone with dispatch. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand, and one of the officers, a younger guy with a badge that said Morrison, walked me to their car and had me sit in the back with the door open while his partner went inside to talk to Greg and the security guards. Morrison pulled out his phone and started taking pictures of my neck where I could already feel the bruises forming, had me turn my head different ways to catch all the angles, then photographed my wrist where Greg had grabbed me. I gave him a shaky rundown of what happened, how Greg had attacked me after getting the divorce papers, the threats he made about killing Stephanie, how he'd grabbed my throat and squeezed. Morrison's partner came back out maybe 20 minutes later with Greg in handcuffs, and I watched through the car window as they put him in the other patrol car that had just arrived. The security guards were giving their statements to another officer, and I heard Christopher describing the destroyed office, the broken window, the holes in the walls. They drove me to the emergency room after that, said I needed to get checked out and have everything documented properly for the case. The ER was busy, but they got me back pretty quick when they heard it was a strangulation case, and the nurse who came in, Michelle Ashby according to her badge, was really careful and thorough. She took more photos with a hospital camera, measuring the bruises with a little ruler she held next to them, documenting every mark on my throat and wrists. She did this whole assessment, checking inside my mouth, looking at my eyes with a light, feeling around my neck for swelling or damage, explaining that strangulation was one of the biggest predictors of future lethal violence in domestic situations. The doctor came in and confirmed soft tissue damage, gave me papers about warning signs to watch for over the next few days, things like difficulty swallowing or breathing changes that could mean internal injuries. A social worker stopped by with pamphlets about domestic violence resources, even though I tried explaining I wasn't the spouse, just got caught up in it, but she said trauma was trauma and left the information anyway. I finally got my phone back and called Stephanie from the waiting room while they processed my discharge papers. She answered on the first ring, and when I told her what happened, she just started sobbing, apologizing over and over, saying she never should have asked me to do it, never thought he'd actually hurt someone else. I told her we needed to focus on keeping her and the kids safe now. now, that Greg had made specific threats about killing her, and she needed to know everything he'd said. She told me she was staying with a friend 2 towns over, had been there since she left, and the kids were enrolled in the school there under a safety plan. The next afternoon, Detective James Barnhart showed up at my apartment to take a formal recorded statement. He set up this little digital recorder on my coffee table and had me go through everything again from the beginning, stopping me sometimes to ask for more details about specific threats Greg had made, exactly what words he used, how he grabbed me, for how long. I was exhausted and my throat hurt to talk, but I wanted to make sure they had everything they needed to keep him locked up as long as possible. He explained they were charging Greg with assault, making terroristic threats, and some other things I didn't quite catch. Said with my injuries and the security guards as witnesses plus the destroyed office, they had a solid case. 2 days later, Karen Arrington from Victim Services came by to help me set up what she called a safety plan. We went through all these practical steps like changing up my daily routes, checking my car for tracking devices, setting up a code word with friends that meant I needed help, installing new locks on my apartment door. She was really calm and methodical about it, which actually helped because I'd been pretty panicked about Greg getting out on bail or something. She showed me how to document everything, keep a log of any contact or suspicious activity, save all voicemails and messages. 3 days after the whole thing happened, my phone rang from a blocked number, and my stomach just dropped. I didn't answer, but they left a voicemail, and when I played it, it was just breathing for like 10 seconds and then Greg's voice really quiet and calm saying, "This isn't over." I called Detective Barnhart right away and forwarded him the recording, trying not to completely freak out because how was Greg calling me if he was supposed to be in jail? Barnhart called back within an hour and said Greg had made bail that morning, that they were looking into the call as a violation of the protection order, but they had to find him first to serve it. Then Greg's company HR department called asking if I could provide a statement about the incident since it happened on their property and they needed it for their investigation. The woman on the phone seemed mostly worried about liability stuff, asking if I planned to sue the company, but she did say Greg had been suspended pending their investigation and wouldn't be allowed back in the building. I met with Laura Appleby, Stephanie's divorce attorney, later that week, and she explained how the criminal case would affect the divorce and custody proceedings. She said Greg's arrest definitely strengthened Stephanie's position, but warned that family court was different from criminal court, that Greg still had parental rights, and the judge would consider what the kids wanted too. She asked me to write out a detailed statement for the divorce case about what I'd witnessed and what Greg had said about Stephanie and the children. Stephanie and I spent hours on the phone coordinating with the kids' school and daycare about new pickup protocols and emergency contacts. The school principal was really understanding, and they implemented this whole password system where only people with the daily password could pick up the kids, and they added Greg to their restricted access list with his photo at all the entrance points. It felt completely insane that we needed all these precautions just to keep kids safe from their own father, but after what I'd seen in that office, I knew Greg was capable of anything. The sheriff tried to serve Greg with the protective order at his house, but he didn't answer even though his car was in the driveway. Then they tried his parents' house and his brother's place, but everyone claimed they didn't know where he was. Detective Barnhart kept assuring me they'd find him and serve the order, but I felt completely exposed knowing Greg was out there somewhere, angry and unserved, probably planning his next move. 2 days later, my phone started buzzing with texts from coworkers asking if I was okay and sending me a link to a Facebook post that made my stomach drop. Someone had created a post with my photo taken from my company's website claiming I was the woman who destroyed Greg's marriage and broke up his family. The post said I'd been having an affair with him for months and then helped his wife steal his kids when he tried to end things with me. Within 3 hours, it had over 200 comments calling me every name you can imagine, and some people were making actual threats about what they'd do if they saw me. I screenshot everything while my hands shook and tried to report the post, but Facebook said it didn't violate their standards. The account that posted it was brand new with a fake name, but I knew it had to be Greg or someone helping him trying to control what people thought about the situation. I spent the whole night taking screenshots of every comment and threat before finally just deactivating all my social media accounts because I couldn't handle seeing more people believe his lies. The next morning at work, everyone was looking at me weird and whispering when I walked by their desks. I tried to focus on my computer screen but kept feeling everyone's eyes on me until finally it was time to leave. Walking out to the parking garage, I was thinking about the Facebook post when I saw my car sitting lower than normal. Why would Greg make bail so quickly after doing something that violent? The breathing on that voicemail gives me chills. Who helped him post that Facebook story while he was supposedly hiding from police? All 4 tires were completely flat with long cuts down the sides that made it clear someone had slashed them on purpose. A piece of paper was tucked under my windshield wiper that just said, "Liars get what they deserve," in block letters. My legs felt weak as I looked around the empty garage, wondering if whoever did this was still watching me. The security guard said their cameras didn't cover that section of the garage, which seemed way too convenient to be a coincidence. I called the police and filed another report while waiting 3 hours for a tow truck and trying not to think about how much 4 new tires would cost. The officer who took my report said without video evidence there wasn't much they could do, but they'd add it to my file about Greg. I started parking in different spots every day and walking different routes to my car, but I couldn't shake the feeling someone was watching me. 3 days after the tire incident, I was making coffee in my kitchen when my phone dinged with an email from an address I didn't recognize. Opening it made my blood run cold because it was a photo of my apartment door taken that morning based on the Amazon brown package sitting on my doormat. The message just said, "Nice place," and nothing else. But the meaning was clear that Greg or someone working with him knew exactly where I lived. My hands were shaking, so bad I could barely forward the email to Detective Barnhart, who called me back within 10 minutes. He said they'd try to trace the email, but these anonymous accounts were hard to track, and in the meantime, I should consider staying somewhere else for my safety. I hung up feeling angry that I was the one who had to leave my home when I hadn't done anything wrong except help a scared woman leave her husband. Karen Arrington from Victim Services called me that afternoon saying Detective Barnhart had contacted her about my situation, and she could arrange emergency housing at a shelter. The shelter was 40 minutes from my work in a building that looked like a regular apartment complex from the outside with cameras everywhere and a security door that needed a code to enter. My room was basically a studio apartment with old furniture and bars on the windows, but at least it felt safer than my place. I packed 2 suitcases with clothes and important papers, trying not to cry about having to leave my own apartment because of Greg's harassment. The other women at the shelter all had similar stories, and we'd nod at each other in the hallways with this understanding that didn't need words. A week into staying at the shelter, I was at my desk when my coworker ran over saying there was some angry guy in the lobby demanding to see me. Looking at the security monitor, I could see Greg arguing with our security guard and gesturing wildly while saying something about a misunderstanding. I watched from an upstairs window as 2 more security guards showed up and started walking him toward the exit, while he kept shouting that he just needed 5 minutes to explain. My coworkers were all staring and whispering as security finally got him outside, and I heard someone say, "That's the guy from the Facebook post," which made me want to disappear. My boss called me into her office an hour later and suggested I work from home for a while until things calmed down, which felt like Greg was winning by making me hide. That night, Detective Barnhart called with the first good news I'd heard in weeks, saying they'd gotten the security footage from Greg's office building. The video clearly showed him grabbing me and throwing things, and the prosecutor said it was strong enough evidence to move forward with charges. For the first time since this started, I felt like maybe people would actually believe me instead of whatever story Greg was spreading. 2 days later, Detective Barnhart called again, saying Greg had been arrested at his brother's house on charges of assault, criminal threats, and witness intimidation from showing up at my work. The judge set bail at $50,000, which sounded like a lot until I found out his brother posted it that same afternoon. At least now Greg had official conditions to follow, including staying away from me and my workplace, but I knew a piece of paper wouldn't stop someone like him. The bail hearing happened the next morning, and I sat in the back row watching Greg's lawyer argue that he was an upstanding member of the community with no criminal record. The lawyer talked about Greg's ties to the community through his children and his job, saying he wasn't a flight risk and deserved to be free while the case proceeded. The judge agreed to release him with a no-contact order and GPS ankle monitor, but I'd researched enough to know those things only track where someone goes, not what they're planning. Greg turned and smirked at me as he walked out of court with his lawyer and brother, which made my skin crawl, knowing he was back on the streets. Over the next few days, I started getting calls and texts from people I thought were friends, saying Greg had reached out to them worried about me. Some of them seemed to really believe his story, that this was all a big misunderstanding, and I was confused about what happened that night in his office. Others were clearly just doing what he asked by checking where I was staying and if I was okay, which I recognized as him trying to get information through other people. I documented every contact in a notebook and blocked each number after taking screenshots, feeling more alone as my circle of people I could trust got smaller. Stephanie texted me that week about the temporary custody hearing where Greg's lawyer apparently spent 2 hours painting her as vindictive and claiming she was coaching the kids to lie about their dad. The judge kept the supervised visitation in place for now, but Stephanie said the kids were confused about why they couldn't see their dad normally, and Greg was using that to make himself look like the victim. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was trying to eat lunch, and Stephanie was sobbing, so hard I could barely understand her. The kids had come home from their supervised visit with Greg, asking why daddy couldn't come home and why mommy was being so mean to him. Greg had spent the whole visit telling them that mommy's friend had lied about him and made up bad stories, and now they were mad at both of us. Her son wouldn't even look at her, and her daughter kept asking if we were trying to hurt daddy. Stephanie kept saying maybe she should drop everything, maybe she was wrong, maybe it wasn't that bad. I reminded her about the bruises and the threats, but she just cried harder. The next morning, I got a certified letter from Greg's company saying he'd been terminated for the incident at his office and the property damage. Another letter came from his lawyer suggesting I could be sued for defamation and interference with his employment since my actions had cost him his job. My hands shook as I read it because I didn't have money for a lawyer. I called Detective Barnhart right away, and he said it was just intimidation tactics, that they couldn't win a case like that, but the threat still made my stomach hurt. My savings account was already empty from all the days I'd missed work and the new locks and security cameras I'd installed. 3 days later, the prosecutor's office called me in for a formal recorded interview to prepare for trial. They made me go through every single detail of that night in Greg's office over and over again. First, they had me tell it straight through, then they went back and asked about every little thing. What exactly did he say? How hard did he grab me? Where were his hands? How long did he hold my throat? By the 3rd hour, I was shaking and crying, having to relive the worst night of my life again and again. Karen sat with me the whole time, holding my hand when it got too hard, reminding me this was building the case against him. The prosecutor said they were adding stalking charges based on all the harassment since that night. The next week, Karen took me to a support group for crime victims that met every Thursday at the courthouse. Walking into that room full of strangers felt scary, but hearing their stories made me feel less alone. One woman had been dealing with her ex-husband's case for 3 years already, going through appeal after appeal. Another man's brother had attacked him, and the family had taken the brother's side. Everyone understood what it was like to have your whole life life turned upside down by someone else's violence. I went to get my oil changed the following Tuesday, and the mechanic called me into the garage to show me something. Tucked up under my car near the wheel well was a small black box with a blinking light. It was a GPS tracker, the kind anyone could buy online for $100. The mechanic said it had probably been there for weeks based on how dirty it was. Detective Barnhart came to collect it for evidence, and I realized Greg had probably been tracking me this whole time, knowing where I worked, where I shopped, where I went. That's how he'd known where to send those flowers to my office. That Saturday, I was driving home from the grocery store when I noticed the same blue sedan had been behind me for the last 4 turns. My heart started racing and I changed lanes, but the car changed too. I turned into a neighborhood I didn't live in, and the car followed. I called 911 while driving, and they told me to head straight to the police station without stopping. As soon as I pulled into the station parking lot, a patrol car intercepted the blue sedan. It turned out to be one of Greg's friends from his softball team, who claimed it was just a coincidence, that he was going to visit someone in that neighborhood. The cops couldn't prove he was following me on purpose, so they had to let him go. 2 weeks after that, I got an official subpoena in the mail saying I had to testify at Greg's trial. Something feels off about how Greg's getting other people to do his dirty work now. The friend from softball just happening to follow the same route? The GPS tracker that was there for weeks makes me wonder how much information he already gathered before getting caught. The district attorney had filed multiple felony charges, including assault, false imprisonment, making threats, and stalking. The trial date was set for 2 months away, which felt both too soon and way too far away. Karen came over that night and explained the whole process, how I'd have to testify in front of Greg and a jury, how his lawyer would try to make me look bad. She helped me practice staying calm and just telling the truth. The preliminary hearing happened 3 weeks later, and I had to sit in the witness chair while Greg's defense attorney tried to tear my story apart. She kept asking if maybe I'd misunderstood Greg's actions, if maybe I'd overreacted because I was scared. She suggested I'd inserted myself into their marriage problems and created drama where there wasn't any. She asked why I'd agreed to deliver the papers if I was so scared of him. I stuck to the facts about him grabbing me, choking me, throwing things, threatening to kill Stephanie. The judge found enough evidence to move forward with a full trial. That same week, Greg showed up at his kids' school claiming there was a family emergency and he needed to pick them up early. The school called Stephanie to verify, and she had to race over there while calling the police. They extended the restraining order and changed his visitation to only supervised visits at a special center with a social worker watching. Stephanie was relieved but worried about how this would mess up the kids even more. Greg's parents started calling her, saying she was being unreasonable and ruining their son's life over nothing. By this point, 3 months of court dates and lawyer meetings and safety measures had completely drained my bank account. I was behind on rent and my credit cards were maxed out. My boss had been patient, but I'd used up all my sick days and vacation time, and my work was suffering from all the stress. The Victim Compensation Fund gave me a little money, but it barely covered gas to get to all the court appointments. Stephanie called me crying because her kids came back from their supervised visit with Greg acting different. Her youngest wouldn't stop crying and kept asking why mommy was trying to take them away from daddy forever. The older one threw his backpack at the wall and screamed that I was a liar who made daddy sad. Greg had spent the whole visit filling their heads with poison about how Stephanie was the bad one, and I was helping her hurt their family. The school called the next day because the older kid had pushed another student and told the teacher his mom was mean and his dad said so. Stephanie sat in her car outside the school for an hour, trying to decide if fighting Greg was actually hurting the kids more than just letting him have partial custody without all the legal battles. She called Karen, who reminded her that giving in now would only teach Greg that using the kids as weapons worked. 2 days later, a package showed up at my temporary housing with no return address and my name written in block letters. Inside was my high school yearbook photo with my face scratched out, so hard the pen had torn through the paper. The shelter staff had to review 3 days of security footage and change their whole mail screening process because of me. I couldn't sleep that night and kept checking the locks on my door every hour. My hands shook so bad the next morning I dropped my coffee mug and it shattered all over the kitchen floor. The hypervigilance was exhausting, but I couldn't turn it off anymore. Karen filed another motion about Greg violating the protective order through the kids and the package, but the court pushed the hearing back 3 weeks due to scheduling conflicts. Every delay felt like the system was telling Greg he could do whatever he wanted. Detective Barnhart kept saying we were building a solid case, but the legal system moved like molasses while we jumped at every noise and strange car. Karen reminded me this was a marathon, not a sprint, but I was already exhausted, and we weren't even halfway done. The night before the custody hearing, I got a voicemail from a blocked number, and Greg's calm voice filled my ear describing the blue house with white shutters where Stephanie was staying. He mentioned the crack in the 3rd step of the porch, and the wind chimes shaped like butterflies hanging by the door. My blood went cold because those details were perfect, and there was no way he should know where she was. I called Stephanie immediately, and she was already packing while I talked because she recognized the description too. Detective Barnhart sent a patrol car to watch the house while Stephanie loaded her kids into the car at 2 in the morning to drive to a hotel 3 towns over. The kids cried the whole way, asking why they had to leave again, and Stephanie had no good answer for them. The prosecutor called the next afternoon with a plea deal offer for Greg. 3 years probation and mandatory anger management counseling, plus extended protective orders if he'd plead guilty to reduced charges. No jail time at all. Stephanie listened to the terms on speakerphone with her face completely blank. She had 48 hours to decide whether to accept it or go to trial where Greg might get real prison time, but could also walk free entirely. The prosecutor said it was a solid deal that guaranteed some accountability, but Stephanie kept saying 3 years probation wasn't enough for what he'd done. I spent the next day writing my victim impact statement at Karen's office. Every word had to be perfect because Greg's lawyer would pick it apart looking for anything they could use against us. I kept it factual and specific about how the attack affected my work and health and daily life. No emotional language that could be called dramatic or exaggerated. Karen helped me revise it 4 times until it was airtight. The prosecutor read it and said it was one of the strongest victim statements she'd seen in 15 years. Greg's lawyer called Karen the morning the deal expired and said they'd accept the plea. Greg would plead guilty to assault and criminal threats in exchange for 3 years probation and a year of anger management classes. The protective orders would stay in place for 5 years for both me and Stephanie. It wasn't enough, but at least there would be official monitoring and consequences if he violated the terms. My boss called me into his office the day after the plea was finalized. The company was putting Greg on a permanent banned list and changing my schedule to random shifts, so no one could predict when I'd be there. But the promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years went to someone else because I'd missed too much work. Some of my coworkers still whispered about me being the other woman, even though I'd explained 100 times I was just delivering papers. The professional damage was already done and would follow me for years. Stephanie found a smaller apartment in a different school district where nobody knew their story. The divorce was finalized with joint legal custody, but primary physical custody going to her. Greg got supervised visits every other weekend that would gradually increase if he followed all the court orders and completed his counseling. She wanted full custody, but her lawyer said this was the best they could get without a full trial. The kids started at their new school using Stephanie's maiden name. A certified letter arrived at my apartment from Greg's lawyer, threatening a civil suit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They wanted compensation for Greg's lost wages and damage to his reputation. Detective Barnhart said it was probably just intimidation since Greg had pled guilty, but I still had to hire my own lawyer to respond. The retainer alone was $2,000 I didn't have. My credit cards were already maxed, and I was considering a second job just to pay for the lawyer to defend me from the man who attacked me. 3 weeks later, I was pumping gas at the station near my apartment when a guy I didn't know walked up and stood way too close to my car. He said his name was Mike and that he worked with Greg, then started talking about how Greg just wanted to move on with his life, and maybe I was the one making things worse by pushing all these legal issues. His breath smelled like cigarettes, and he kept stepping closer every time I moved back. He mentioned how I usually got gas on Tuesday mornings instead of Saturday afternoons like today, and how my new route to work through downtown must add at least 10 minutes to my commute. My hands were shaking as I finished pumping, and he leaned against my car door so I couldn't get in. He said Greg was a good guy who made one mistake and didn't. I think everyone deserved a second chance. I took a picture of him with my phone and he backed off, but as I drove away, he was still standing there watching. I went straight to the police station and filed a report, but the officer said there wasn't anything they could do since he hadn't actually threatened me. 6 months after the attack, my whole life had changed into something I barely recognized. I'd changed my phone number twice, never took the same route to work 2 days in a row, and stopped going to my favorite coffee shop or gym. My social circle had shrunk to just a few trusted friends who understood why I couldn't meet them at new places without checking the exits first. Every car that followed me for more than 2 turns made my heart race. Every unexpected knock at the door sent me into panic mode. I'd installed 3 extra locks on my apartment door and a security camera that I checked obsessively from my phone. The isolation was crushing, but it felt safer than being exposed. Even simple things like grocery shopping had become military operations where I parked near the entrance, kept my keys between my fingers, and never wore headphones. Karen called one day and said she'd found a therapist who specialized in violence survivors and thought I should give it a try. Greg's coworker Mike just happening to know her gas station schedule and new work route? That's not casual workplace gossip. Someone's been watching her movements and reporting back. The way he blocked her car door while talking about second chances feels like a rehearsed intimidation tactic. The first session was brutal because I had to tell the whole story again from the beginning while the therapist took notes. She validated that my reactions were normal responses to an abnormal situation, and we started working on ways to reclaim some control. We practiced breathing exercises for the panic attacks and developed safety plans that weren't quite so restrictive. She helped me understand that hypervigilance was my brain's way of protecting me, but it was also keeping me trapped. Slowly, we worked on expanding my comfort zone, starting with small things like sitting with my back to the door at a restaurant with a trusted friend. At the 6-month custody review, the judge kept Greg's supervised visits in place after hearing how he'd shown up at the kids' soccer game, even though the restraining order specifically prohibited it. Stephanie testified that the kids were in therapy now, and the therapist said they were starting to understand that their dad had problems with anger that weren't their fault. The older one had nightmares, and the younger one kept asking when daddy would be better. It broke my heart hearing how this was affecting them, but the judge said their safety had to come first. Greg's lawyer argued he was in anger management and deserved more access, but the judge wasn't convinced. 2 weeks later, I saw Greg at the courthouse when I was there for a different hearing about the civil suit. My whole body went cold, and I froze in the hallway as he walked past with his lawyer. He didn't approach me, but he made eye contact and gave this small smile that made my skin crawl. I told the victim advocate who was with me, and she walked me all the way to my car, checking the back seat before I got in. The fear spike lasted the rest of the day, and I couldn't eat dinner that night. Even though the incidents had tapered off, I realized hypervigilance had become my permanent state. I checked my locks 3 times before bed, scanned every parking lot before getting out of my car, and automatically mapped exits in every building. Friends started noticing I was different, more guarded and less spontaneous. Some understood and adapted, always texting before they came over and being patient when I needed to leave events early. Others drifted away, unable to relate to this new version of me who couldn't just relax and have fun anymore. Stephanie and I met for coffee at a place with good sight lines and multiple exits. We talked about setting boundaries for our friendship going forward because the trauma bond wasn't healthy for either of us long term. She thanked me for everything I'd done, but we both agreed we needed to build separate lives beyond this situation. We decided to limit contact to just checking in once a month by text. It was sad but necessary. 8 months after that night in Greg's office, I signed a lease for a new apartment in a security building across town with a doorman and key fob access. The hypervigilance hadn't gone away, and probably never would completely, but I was learning to build a life around it rather than despite it. I wasn't the same person who had walked into that office with divorce papers, but I was still here, still fighting and slowly creating a new normal that felt sustainable, even if it would never feel quite safe. Thanks for hanging out with me while I rambled through all these strange twists and turns. Hopefully my questions didn't get too annoying. Catch you in the next one. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.